today.
Yes, I think we're ready though. So thank you all for coming. It looks like last time I looked, we had a little over 20 folks in the room. So thanks for making time out of your day to come be with Trish and I for this session on cultivating Agile culture with community commitment and continuous learning. Let's see. Let's tell you a little bit about us, if the slides will work. Maybe, maybe not. Is the screen share even on?
There you go. I see us.
Excellent.
Great pictures.
Thanks.
So I'm Leslie Morse. I'm based in Columbia, South Carolina. I've been with Scrum.org a little bit more than a year now, and have just recently shifted my focus to really work on our overall community engagement strategy, which includes the PST program. So if you've got any interest in becoming a professional Scrum trainer, feel free to reach out after the session. And when I'm not in the office, I like to do things like listen to live music, cook, and fish. In fact, cook the fish that I might catch. So I'm not nearly as adventurous as my co-presenter today, Trish.
So hey everyone, my name is Patricia Kong. I am in the Boston area in Massachusetts in the United States of America. I guess we should make those things clear, right? Because these things are all global now. I am jumping off a building there because I could and I wanted to. And it was probably one of those moments where I was telling myself, let me feel alive. So that's in New Zealand. And I was jumping off a building, and that's what I do in my free time. Otherwise, I've been at Scrum.org for a while now, I think 9 years. And Scrum.org is the home of Scrum, created by Ken Schwaber, who is the co-creator of the Scrum framework. Other than that, the only thing that you really need to know about me is that at Scrum.org, I think about organizational agility, and I am recovering because I am a traditionally very corporate person. So moving along, I think the only thing that we wanted to show you from the Scrum.org family is the fact that we've just all been really trying to adapt for the last year. So this is actually us in the beginning of COVID, trying to get together as trainers and say, hey, what are we going to do? How do we deliver this information? How do we do conferences? So training, education, community, and it's obviously delivered and thought about by people.
Oh, absolutely. And that community and culture aspect that Trish is actually pointing to there is what we want to dig in with you all today. And so we're going to just start this off. So great, whether go to a browser on your phone, open up Chrome or whatever it is on your laptop, and pop over to menti.com. We just want to hear your thoughts before we really dive in today on, if you were to describe an Agile culture, how might you describe it? On the form you're going to get on the Menti site, you will have 3 text boxes where you can put in some words or phrases. And so when you get to menti.com, you're just going to use code 6710274. And once you put that in the first time, as long as you don't close your browser, it'll toggle you through all the different polls and interactive questions that we've got for today. So let's go ahead and toggle over there and see what words and phrases are going to come up from folks.
Do I get to participate?
Yes. We're going to just be able to sit there and check your email and do other things while listening to us talk today. Okay. Forgiving. Oh, that's a fun word. Transparent. I like collaborative for sure. I've had 5 people respond so far. I like that. We'll give it another 45 or 60 seconds here, see what else comes in. Flexible, I like. Responsive. Customer centric. That's a good one too.
Transparent.
Yeah, that seems to clearly be a winner.
That transparent thing.
So important. So important. What other ones are jumping out for you, Trish?
I realized I have a little knot in my neck. Market-based, I'm reading the smaller ones because
Yeah.
I'm curious about what's on the side. Obviously, collaborative, transparent, flexible, all the things that we want. We can be adaptive. Um, adapt Adaptive is coming up a lot.
Yeah. And I love how there's variations on some things, right? We've got continuous learning and ongoing learning, right? Adaptive and flexible. Oh, adaptable is there too. You're right. That is in a couple different places. I think these are all words that we absolutely identify with.
Mine is
but-
not in there. Just pointing out, mine didn't make it in. I must have done this wrong. User error, probably.
Did you fill out all 3 fields and then hit submit?
And I put in can be fake. That's what I put in, and I don't see it there.
Yeah, you're right. Agile culture absolutely can be fake. In fact, that's kind of where we want to go. And why is it not toggling back to PowerPoint? There it goes. So if those are how you all are describing Agile culture, let us tell you a little bit of what we think Agile culture isn't. And one of those things is that it is not like just a big fan club where all of a sudden like everybody's celebrating and we're all groupies of this Agile thing. Because that's sometimes what it can feel like when you're in a fake Agile organization, kind of as Trish was just pointing to.
Yeah. What this makes me think about sometimes also is a lot of times people are saying, oh, there's some good Scrum over there, some good Agile over there. The whole organization is going to be Agile now. And so an executive goes, hey, we're all going to do it, and we're going to do it all in 1 year. And so we all start running. And that's kind of what this makes me think about too, where somebody is saying, we're all going Agile, and everybody just starts like herding, like a herd of people doing that. Oh, there you go.
Which reminds me of that idea, right? A lot of like Agile culture is not like a factory where we just like send people in and they come out Agile on the other side, right? It kind of relates to the anti-pattern of what we're going to talk about around continuous learning. Like you're not just lining people up and sending them to this class and this class and this class and this class to go learn more. It shouldn't feel like that factory mindset.
Yeah. It also shouldn't be go in, everybody gets trained, everybody gets stamped with their cert, and that's it. And that's sometimes what it's assumed to be.
Yeah. And so often it's like that. And I love this visual. The like Agile's just really like this fake thing that's lipstick on a pig.
We just wanted to put this picture in there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, how many of us are in these fake Agile organizations where it's like it's in practice only, it's in name only, like things might look better on the outside, and like we've got happier teams, but that really isn't what an Agile culture is meant to be. They really are like highly organized and highly disciplined. When we were thinking about imagery that evoked what it is we want to make sure everybody's grounded in, like the precision and coordination that pit crews have when servicing performance vehicles, like it is like clockwork. The way that they collaborate, the way that they talk together and they coordinate their fine grained movements in order to get that car in and out of the pits is the kind of discipline and rigor that the best Agile cultures have. We're all working around that same goal together.
What this makes me think about, and especially as when we were looking at that word cloud, right? Transparent and collaborative. I think that in order for a pit crew to even work this way, and I know nothing about this kind of stuff, but in order for them to even be doing this, there's something for me that's subtle really about the notion of pride and work. But there's got to be the ego that's out of that, right? Because we're all trying to play a part in this. So there's a little bit of the notion where we are working together, we're collaborating. And so that notion of ego has to be removed from the conversation, where we're not trying to battle each other. We're not looking at the status of each other, but we're really looking at how do we get that that outcome that we're looking for.
Yeah, it's also the fantastic illustration of a cross-functional team, right? The guy that's running the jack is like the best at running the jack, and he's in there doing it with everybody else in pursuit of whatever our goal is. And so the way that they come together with their specialties and know that if something goes wrong with this other person, I can also jump in there and help. It's really a fantastic metaphor for what it is we're doing. Agile cultures also have that sense of bonding and I've got your back, right? if these folks like just climbed some big hill and now they're relaxing and sort of, reaping the rewards of their day of hiking and enjoying the view, like they did it together. And there's this commitment to each other that is really important. The commitment to how they're supporting each other, right? Somebody twisted their ankle when they were going up the hill. We're going to be there and we're going to help you. And so that sense of community and bond and relationship is also really important.
Yeah, a lot of the times that you see this in organizations. So I have a organizational behavior background, and one of the things that Leslie's talking about here is trust. And what we know is that you can't have, that trust needs to be built, and a lot of the times the way it's built is through conflict. And so naturally, if you're working together in a team, there's usually a little bit of conflict, right? And a little bit of healthy, how do we do this? How do we get through these tight spots? We disagree, but we agree to disagree. That kind of stuff is what gets you there, right? So when people think of, oh, we're just happy and it's the little bit of lipstick on the pig thing, there's a fake version of this and there's a real version of this. And what I think is so important that Leslie's talking about here is that notion of community and what we can actually do to build these types of bonds.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Trish, right, this idea of experimentation, right? We are always discovering and creating together. And your focus on EBM is like a perfect illustration of what we mean about bringing that like scientific experimentation, discover together sort of aspect of continuous learning. So what does this bring up for you in terms of Agile culture?
When I think of evidence-based management, which is EBM, what that means to me and the work that I'm doing is saying, how do we manage with the best holistic information that we have possible in an agile space? If we're working on complex things, that means that it's not something that's predictive. We've got to try to work and embrace this experimentation, empirical cycles, empirical thinking, right? We all know that. What's interesting is sometimes organizations, when they say that they're agile, do they really get that empirical bit? And what we found is not. And so EBM is saying, hey, a little bit kind of like prove it, has this stuff made you better? And are you focused on that? The other images for me evoke, especially the one of the pit crew, is something that we see a lot in agile transformations, and sometimes why they succeed, sometimes why they fail. But the challenges of it is the barrier that's put around, right? So they're in a contained space, they're trying to run some experiments, they're checking some stuff, and that is what allows for innovation. And what's interesting, and I think we'll get into this, is how does that even sustain, right? When those barriers are removed, or should they be removed? What happens when those things are not contained, and what does that do to this notion of agile culture?
Yeah, because I think the word cloud itself, it did a great job of showcasing a lot of the words that we use to describe agile cultures, and you see us priming for where we're going around community, commitment, and continuous learning with some of this imagery that we're using, that how we want to describe an agile culture. But the question really comes down to, how do we create it? And so we want to hear from all of you again. And so let me toggle back to Mentimeter. And so what you're going to see now is we're going to go through two different questions. The first being, what kills an agile culture? And the next being, what might cultivate an agile culture? And so I'm excited to see what you all have to say about these two things. First being, what kills the agile culture? Ooh, metrics. Who else do we have? Here we go. Micromanagement, fear of change. I like that.
Over documentation, metrics, it's interesting. Closed-mindedness, ego, no ego, amigo. Lack of communication, non-communication, lack of leadership, traditionalists, stubbornness.
No mistakes in learning. That's a fun one. Lack of trust. You pointed to that earlier, Trish.
Yeah, management in general. Micromanagement. So when I look at this, micromanagement and metrics is very interesting. So like like Leslie had mentioned, when I think about evidence-based management, one of the things that I talk about and stress is the notion of metrics and measurement. And what we see is that there's this how that can be used wrong, right? Measurement and metrics. If you're looking toward a goal, why is it that this metric is the one that you're looking at, right? So we all know the velocity and how we're comparing that and all those things, which leads to micromanagement, that leads to fear and distrust in the teams.
Mhm.
The interesting of that is how do we use that to make those things positive, right? How do we get the things that are actually valuable that we're trying to understand? And so if you are interested in learning about how to use measurement as a technique just to say, did I achieve my goal? Then EBM might be interesting for you.
Yeah. There is a variety of things in here around metrics. And I think it's interesting, Trish, the way you frame it, right? Metrics used the wrong way can absolutely result in, right, pushing people down, putting them too far into a box. And that tends to be what we see when it's most killing in agile culture, is when those metrics are geared towards output, not outcome, because then we start optimizing for the wrong things. And actually, most often what's going on is we're incenting one batch of people over here around some outputs, and these people on some different outputs, and these things are conflicting. So we don't have that sense of community and thing that's holding us together, so that we're actually moving forward in pursuit of satisfying our customers. And so it's really easy for these sort of things to get into the way. And I love that how many of these are also pointing to just difficulty with change in general.
Well, the relationship there, right? When that I might attempt to say in micromanagement and lack of trust and all those things is that I do a big thing where when I'm looking at clients and what they measure, that tells me what their goals are, right? So it's kind of, if you think about it this way, is what you measure is what you think matters.
Mhm.
Or it might just be the easiest thing to do. And you've really got to challenge yourselves with the teams and with management to think about how to change that behavior.
That is
All right.
absolutely right. And so let's flip to the cultivating side of it. So what cultivates an agile culture, right? And so we have got a poll for that one as well. And so we'll see what comes up there. So if those are all things that we're killing it, what might we do to build it? Empowerment. I always love that the first word that comes up is just like big and center in the screen.
Encouraging environment, ability to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. What about ability to even make decisions, right? Like, oh, that with empowerment, encouragement. It's the ability to make mistakes and the ability to make decisions is closely related to me around the overhead of decision making. So if we're talking about being able to ebb and flow and adapt and move quickly, like we were talking about before, I really love how these things are the practices and techniques that would support that.
Yeah. Right. And autonomy is showing up here because that's what you're talking about. It's autonomy and decision making, right? Getting that happening at the lowest level possible. And that stuff won't happen unless that foundation of trust is there. And it's so interesting how in both of these word clouds that have been emerging, I'm so reminded of Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? If that base level dysfunction, absence of trust is not there, we can't ever really work through that hierarchy to get to the top of the pyramid, which is inattention to results. We'll never be focused on results if all of the other building blocks aren't there.
Yeah. And that has a lot to do with leadership and what they're focused on. And I'm looking at right now the levels of leadership, and it's kind of, you're thinking about outcomes. That's awesome. And I think now, especially And nowadays, it's really thinking about the impact that we make with society. Anyways, here's a cheeky thing that I do while we're waiting for this to finish, is that when I talk about the decisions thing and I talk about what's that overhead look like. So when management wants to talk about, what are their metrics and well, how much is it costing you to make these decisions and how many levels does it have to go? So that's a fun one.
Yeah.
Just to think about how much does it cost a company to make a decision?
That's absolutely, absolutely true. And so what I like about this is that you're pointing to a lot of the places that we want to go. And of course, it's not toggling back to PowerPoint the way it's supposed to right now. There we go. Which is, when it comes down to it, all of those things that we've called out and we've referenced and we've highlighted already are absolutely true. But the number of organizations Trish and I have been in and out of, we've seen it done right a lot of places, right? They push decision making down to the lowest level. Teams have autonomy. Those borders that she was talking about start dissolving and teams can work together while they're solving all these complex problems. They actually start creating better outcomes for customers. And then things still go wrong somewhere along the way. And if we could have created a poll that said, like, how many of you have been part of an agile transformation that went sideways or was abandoned part of the way through? I think about it, so many organizations that I went to, I was like the third coach or consultant or trainer that was in there. And it was like I was climbing over the dead bodies of the prior people that had forged the way before me. But we get in there and it's the same story over and over and over again. And so when we boil it down to what we think is missing and how we want to challenge all of y'all to start thinking really differently, it comes down to community, commitment, and continuous learning. And these are not three things to be looked at independently. They all work together, but commitment is the cornerstone because it has to be commitment to community in continuous learning in order to build the full picture. So we're actually just gonna stop screen sharing for just a jiffy and talk to y'all about these three areas, why we think they're important, and what they each mean to us. And then we'll get back into the presentation, a couple more questions that'll help us wrap up before we're done here in about a half hour. So Trish, when you think about these three areas, what really comes up with you and how do you see it guiding the commitment to cultivating culture in a different way?
I almost want to dive into some of these pieces individually first. So when I think about, because each one of these things can be done well or done terribly, right? Like we've talked about crappy COPs. Some of these things need to exist. And then, like we said, we'll wrap it up and talk about how all these things look together. But when I think about community, and I think about this notion, like, when we talk about an organization that's scaling or just you have a large community, so naturally the COPs form. I think what we're looking for in a community that embraces the same values and principles, something that, we even seek through friendship, a lot of times it can feel really shallow. So they said, oh, we've got an agile community. That means that everybody got a PSM1. We're in a community now. And I think that if we really want to be thinking about community, there's really several aspects that have to exist. And obviously, Leslie, you're very deep in community. But for me, it's really about the leadership and listening. It's really about the communication, our connection, and then actually the cadence of meetings that we can have, like things that we're doing now, especially in the agile community. And the hard thing is to avoid apathy, right? So what happens is when you're in an organization, if there's no organizational support, but there's a lot of individual interests, you're going to have a problem in the same way that if you have no organizational support or a lot of organizational support to have something happen, but no individual interests. And so the way that I think you can really see if a community is doing well, if it's self-serving itself. So if it is really interested in something where they're going to try to do experiments, how do they want to improve as a community? And I think one way to test that in the organizations that you're working on is if you have any initiative that is around something that's community or people based, if the central authority was removed, the person who organizes it, would those meetings still happen? Because I'm assuming there's meetings behind them. So if we removed those things, would that community still be held together is the question that I would look at. And so that's how I judge the strength of a community, because I think left and right now, everybody goes, you're in this community. Thank you for being in this community. When I go to yoga, they're like, namaste. Thank you for being in our company's community. And I'm like, when I dig deep into that, it can feel flaky at times.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like little rah-rah on community.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing in the undertone of what you're saying, Trish, is right. It's the missing commitment to how community needs to serve us. And like, I get, right, commitment is directly one of the Scrum values, and it's one of the things that we talk about all of the time. But how do we really have open and honest conversations about what we are and are not committed to? Because at the end of the day, commitment to change is probably the most important aspect of commitment that I see breaking down in organizations. We even suffer from it at scrum.org, right? Especially as we navigated the pandemic over the past, 14 months now, 15 months, whatever it's been. Yes, we feel this pain. We want to try something different, and we might try it for 2 or 3 weeks. And then it's like, oh, we don't like it as much. It's not as good as this, and we abandon it. And then in another 3 months, we're like, that thing that was annoying 6 months ago is still annoying because we didn't have the perseverance and the commitment to actually change. And so if you're not familiar with the Satir change curve idea, go Google it. It's absolutely one of the best pieces of theory that I use when I'm talking to organizations about the pain associated with change. So it's this idea that we're at whatever level of performance and things that we are today. We aspire to be better and be different in the future. But that moment we change, we actually get worse before we start getting better. And that the J curve effect, or this valley, in fact, they call it the valley of despair on the graph. As you've gotten through the worst of it, there's this point in there called actually the point of failure. And this is where commitment and community and continuous learning must come to bear in full force. Because if you get to that point of failure where it's like, gosh, we're not as great as we had been before we started this Agile thing, we're still getting used to all the changes and still figuring it all out, it's really easy to abandon. In fact, if you're an Agile coach for hire, that's when you get fired. Or maybe you're the executive that initially sponsored the Agile transformation. That's kind of when you exit the situation. And if that commitment to moving through that point of failure isn't there, they can all unravel. And the way you get through it is through this incredibly strong community that Trish was just talking about. Those people that are going to have your back, that we're all in this together, and we're going to inspect and adapt as we go through it. Because we're not just doing continuous learning for the sake of innovating our products. The continuous learning aspect of it is continuing to iterate on what we even mean Agile to be. And Trish, you've got 3 really great points on why Agile in the first place. So talk a little bit about those, and then we can weave this more into how it relates to community commitment and continuous learning.
And I'll think about, I want to share the outcomes of when we think of what Scrum and Agile are for. So let me back into this way. The outcomes of Scrum and Agility that we seek is to increase business value, right? It's to decrease non-value added waste, and it is to manage risk exposure. Those are the outcomes that we're looking for. And a lot of times what I find is that we go, hey, we need to build an Agile culture. We need to do an Agile transformation, blah, 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 blah. And I think we sometimes, especially when we just get lost in the whatever this is called, you're lost in that. we forget that we're actually trying to pursue something. Like the goal is not to become agile, right? The goal is to have a great place to work where we're delivering value and we feel, like awesome professional human beings. We're able to embrace our craft. We're able to upskill, to become better communicators, higher EQ, better at doing what it is that we love to do. When I think of this notion of commitment, which is when we asked Ken Schwaber, when there was the last update to the Scrum Guide, which one was most important for him, it was commitment, because without commitment, none of the other ones matter, right? There's 5 Scrum values. And when I think of this, if for me, I might have a different tone than Leslie, because I don't necessarily agree. Actually, I don't know if this is agree or disagree, but I don't think that it's super hard. And so I don't think that you can order a bunch of people to change, which is what a lot of sometimes, big consulting companies or whatever, we're going to get this change going.
Yeah,
and I think
it's the lining the people up through the door of change.
Yeah, that one, right? So I think that actually we do agree. It's like the same thing. You can't order me to stop eating potato chips. Like I'm going to do it, once a week, that's it. Like get my wine, I can't change those things. It's not. And what can't change though, and we see this in the addition of the things that we've focused on through transitions of companies to work in a different way, is that we can really get them focused on certain things. So this is where for me, and you can see that into the addition of the Scrum guides and the EBM guide and Nexus guides and all these things, is this notion of a goal. And now we have a strong conversation about leadership and what is that vision and hyper focus on that goal. And this is for me how this intersects commitment, community, and culture. So if any of you are familiar with The Power of Habits and the story of Paul O'Neill, who came in the 80s, he was CEO, and they thought he was going to talk about profits and he was going to talk about, how is he going to make this aluminum company better? He came up and, really nice party, and he didn't talk about any of that. He said, we are going to be the safest company, no incidents, safest company ever. And people are like, what are you talking about? Sell your stock now. You have to tell us how you're going to up profit. And he said, I don't think you're listening to me. We are here to talk about safety and what we're going to do. Now, when you think about that, that sounds kind of crazy, but what he knew is that focus on that one big audacious goal was going to have to change the structure of the company. It was going to have to say, we care about our employees and we care about them being safe. Now, guess what? It costs a lot of money when you have those incidents. And what happened was when they started to look at that, not only did he earn the respect of the people that worked for him, but they also saw that because of that, their profits, like during that time where it was maybe like, I think it went up like 300% or something crazy like that. And he put his money where his mouth was. When he heard there was stuff going on, he said, no, look at the reports. I have reports, no incidents here. And they said, no, people in that community, I think it was in Mexico, said, your plant is dangerous. There's stuff happening. He went in, he looked at it, had HR, they flew down there, and there was something that was covered up, small incident, right? And so they covered that up, and he said, did the executive who was running that plant know about it? Yes, there's no way that he didn't. Fired him 2 days later, right? So that is like, can be shocking, but for their culture, it became a part of their culture. You take that and how serious that is versus I work, a couple of years ago, I've been working with an oil and gas company, and they talk about safety in the same way, but it's not, because it's just a vision statement. We're super safe. And when we walk on the stairs, we hold the railing. But when we dig in deep and we talk about the documentation that we need for people who are actually out there in the North Sea getting oil, what does that look like? They know that all the problems is with the implementation and all the safety. Like everybody knows it. And everybody knows that, well, there's a lack of motivation of how to do it. There's not the learning of how to get better. There's not pride in work. There's all those things. And instead of looking at that, what they're looking at is how can I document this process better? And so that it's a really different in terms of the community, the culture, the commitment, and continuous learning in there versus, we have this as a very expensive vision statement. That was my soapbox. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I've got a short story I want to share that is all of this stuff in action as well. And what it is and what we're illustrating in these stories is blowing up the idea of corporate propaganda. When we just have the stuff on the wall and we do it in name only. And so that lipstick on a pig is sort of the thing that we're trying to get away from, because I gotta say, and I'll say this before, I'm going to get on my soapbox before I get to my story. Sometimes as agilists, we make it way too complicated, right? It's, oh, well, we've got to do this and that and this and that. And we don't actually focus on like, what is one tiny thing in terms of transformation we can all be committed to? We can build a sense of community about it, put it into action and learn how we're going, and then tackle the next piece. It's like we say, we're not agile until we put all of the Lego pieces together, or until all of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are there, or we can't get started really with the most important part of the jigsaw puzzle until we have all the edges created. And it's this industrialized sort of mindset that it's like, if we use this predict and plan approach for cultivating an agile culture, then we'll get it. But we know predict and plan doesn't work well when it comes to actually building products that customers love. So why do we use that same predict and plan mindset when it comes to building an agile culture? And so even little phrases like change management and thinking about how we want to go through these initiatives and manage the change is completely a fallacy as well. We need to be fluent in change the same way that we are fluent in languages. So instead of thinking about what's our change management approach for this stuff, it's like, how do we just build greater change fluency in our organizations so that we can adapt and pivot a lot faster? The story I wanted to get to was a healthcare company in the Pacific Northwest that I did some work with. And I couldn't believe their commitment to community as it pertains to cultivating the culture that they wanted. One of their core values, and it was a religious-based backing organization, every single meeting began with a reflection of some sort that sort of set the context and the intent behind why that group of people was ever together. The richness in conversation that happened, the quality of the discussions that happened in those meetings, it was just incredible. When we were going through and doing their assessment, preparing to help them initiate launching their first Agile teams, we saw this in action, and we were able to leverage that ingrained pattern and that ingrained habit for how we started using reflections that were related not only to their company culture, but also to Agile values and principles. And so we had those little things to build on that helped them get a better running start early on. And so their sense of community about how they talked about Agile was very, very different simply from the beginning. So these are those sort of things in action. And you're probably sitting there going, yeah, this all sounds good, but it's kind of theoretical. I want to share with you two things that I specifically study that helps us do this better. Because what I can say is there's not a playbook to follow. Trish and I couldn't come and sit with you and be like, oh, you want to get better at community commitment and continuous learning? Here's a list of the 45 techniques that need to go into your communications plan and your rollout strategy in order to make it all better. It is coming at it from an entirely different angle. And the three things that I study to help me get better at this are overall organization and relationship systems intelligence, the underpinnings of that, which are called the RSI principles, which is relationship systems intelligence. And then one of the core things that go into it are ground conditions for change. So I just dropped some of those phrases into the chat for you there. And when I talked about commitment a couple minutes ago, I was talking about the most important aspect of commitment was to that of commitment to change and do things differently. So I just want to expose to you really quickly, like what the ground conditions for change are, because I think they're a critical building block in getting organizations moving forward on doing all of this differently. First, new information must enter whatever the organization is or whatever the group or system is. And that new information has to be completely centered on the why change needs to happen, right? And that's something everybody needs to commit to, and we all need to have each other's back around it. That helps build the second ground conditions for change, which is a sense of shared purpose, right? How is it meaningful for me and for us? And taking the time to learn about all of this and hear about all of it from everybody in order to create these shared purpose stories is very time consuming and often one that is skipped, which ends up in us having these kind of anti-patterns of agile culture that we talked about early on. The third aspect of ground conditions for change is everyone has the opportunity to give input on how the change will occur. And this is a thing that's called deep democracy, meaning that every voice is heard. And the hard part about it is that just because we hear everybody doesn't mean we'll actually be doing something with it, but we have to honor everyone's voice and hear where they are now. Because the last ground condition for change is that everyone understands how what we hear will be used in final decisions. And so it's like when those four things go together, they don't explicitly relate to any of the three lenses that we're calling forward here, but they're the things that make the ground fertile for the change and for the agile culture to actually hold true. And so if you want to go study and you want to go learn more about how to make these changes well, those are just a couple places that we want to point you to before we start wrapping up. What else do you have, Trish, that you want to add before we get back into some of the polling?
I think that as we're going through these different times and we're looking, and this notion of agility is just becoming a way of work, right? So Leslie and I do a lot of stuff around future work, future fit, that kind of stuff. And when we're looking at organizations and the with the studies that Leslie's talking about, it makes me think about how during the pandemic, during the last year, pandemic plus all these other things, right? The organizations that have been able to survive, there was these several studies, but it looked at three different themes, and what was occurring in these three different themes was really strong visioning, empowerment, accountability. So that's a lot of what Leslie said, and when she was saying that, it made me think about these things. And so we can talk about vision, empowerment, accountability, and depending on the day, honestly, I am like tired of that stuff, or I'm really psyched about it because it is about how engaged I am as a human being, and it's about how engaged the organization is as a system, and how we all fit together. And so that notion of commitment and community and continuous learning for me really is there, because that is how you probably strengthen the engagement. I get so frustrated sometimes with all these challenges of agile transformations, and I get all this, oh, it failed again, what are we not doing right? And sometimes what I've started to think about is the people, the bodies that we're climbing over. I respect that they're still there because hopefully they're trying to still fight the good fight. And when those barriers get removed and there are people who just leave, which is kind of about the future of work, who should I work for now? Who's good enough? Those people have seen something, experienced something better, and they can go and take that and spread their love somewhere else. So that's just another tangent that I'm pulling, but it really made me think about those three things, Leslie, is the vision, the empowerment, and the accountability.
Yeah. And there are the ways that you manifest a community, like that fatigue that you were talking about. Like, I can't get up every day and feel this way, but I might still be in it today. And so that aspect of community helps like keep you resilient and have more fortitude as you go through these challenging things, because we're not going to always be on it. And that's really hard sometimes. So this is where we want you to get curious. Kind of like we said, like this may sound in some ways a little basic, but we have a hypothesis that when we go into some of these initiatives in terms of cultivating agile culture, we're really just making it more complicated than it has to be. So get curious with yourself and get curious by looking around your organization where we might not be coming back to the basics and focused on these 3 core areas the way we should be. And then we've just got some other questions for you to lean into around the other dimensions. What do you think are the most important places to get curious, Trish?
Well, I think that they're all super important. Also, to I mentioned engagement, or even the notion of vision, empowerment, and accountability. When you look at those 3 aspects of community, commitment, continuous learning, do you feel that those all exist in the organization? And how engaged would you say you yourself and other people are in all of these areas? How would you look at those together? Because we know that we can pull them apart, and then a lot of the times we're setting ourselves a little bit up for failure. The one that I am particularly myself, I love community. I'm part of obviously a mission-based organization like Leslie is, and obviously we're all passionate people here. The thing that for me I think is changing a little bit is how we think about continuous learning. And Leslie and I have talked about this, and she's been sharing a lot of different things and insights with me. But the notion of how we think about application of learning, how we're all learning differently now and working differently now, is an interesting thing. So I think it hopefully will change from that little factory of like, we're going to do some stadium training, because we all make money through training too, but how do we make that super meaningful where there's application at the end?
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit on all the things that I want to say, and what I'm getting curious about is actually like what other people are learning. So if you go over to, and I already toggled there, back into Menti, you'll get a chance to let us know, like, what are you taking away from this? So like share your feedback with us, because we're just kind of curious. And so we'll leave this up here on the screen for just a minute or two.
Can I do a little pitch?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this actually, I didn't make this connection, but when we're talking about what we're getting curious about, I am corporate background, not very emotive person, but as the brand of Scrum.org is professionalism, and that has meant a lot of different things to me, and hopefully to you. And I think in today's culture, like I wouldn't say super open, but like I'm an authentic person, right? And so I try to be. Well, that sounded very ego, right? I'm an authentic person. That's stupid. I try to be like, cut the bullshit kind of person. And tomorrow at this time, I'm going to be facilitating a 60-minute workshop on shame, which is a totally different topic that you would think that we might talk about and that I might talk about. But we're co-facilitating a workshop on shame. And one of those things it's helping me get curious about is how do we bring ourselves truly to each situation? How do we bring ourselves as a whole there?
Yeah. I think that's so spot on. And I think it's the hard part about having a talk on this topic and our inherent desire to want to know the right way to do stuff. But what Trish is kind of focusing on is in the vulnerability that goes into looking at something like shame and how that becomes our own personal impediment to building ourselves is another thing that I geek out on, which is the difference in horizontal development versus vertical development. Oftentimes we are missing the ball in cultivating agile cultures because it's learn technique, 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 technique. I'm going to go take a class on psychological safety. I'm going to go take a class on facilitation. I'm going to go take a class on this. And it's so now I know all this stuff, but I actually have an issue with the popular Maya Angelou quote, just because you know better, or now that you know better, you should do better. We can acquire knowledge and knowledge and knowledge all day long, but until we start doing the work on ourselves, which is the vertical development axis, actually changing the way that we think and relate to the world around us, some of these skills we can't bring online. And so that sense of community, when you have a deliberately developmental culture that's committed to how we all are together, continuously learning, that vertical development starts happening. And it's like upgrading your personal operating system as well as your organization's operating system. Because all these things we've known that we should be doing for all these years, all of a sudden we just start doing them because now we're running the internal kind of software and infrastructure that's necessary for that psychological safety app to start functioning properly. And so it's this really cool like way to explore, and right, the RSI principles, ground conditions for change, the stuff I was pointing to with ORSC are all ways to start getting involved in that. But it isn't as simple as do this technique, do this approach, and you'll just get what, get what we're talking about here. So I'm scrolling down the screen to see some of the other things that are coming up here. Ways to rephrase showing Agile culture what it is and is not, and also when discussing metrics, right? How to bring purpose, that outcome versus output conversation. I love that. Oh, great uplifting intervention. Right, this philosophy goes way beyond Agile. I absolutely agree with that. That is so true. What else is jumping out for you here, Trish?
I'm biased because I talk about activity, output, outcome all the time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give a super simple example. So if you're thinking about what you are as a manager, as a whatever, thinking about in terms of success, right? Measurements are our goals for success. When we talk about activity, think of that as I'm digging a well. The output is the well. The outcome is I can drink water. So that's a simple way, hopefully, that paints that pictures to take it forward. I think, Leslie, you have done a terrific job transitioning the slides. I'm very impressed by that, guys. We were fussing with that a little bit, and I hope that this conversation, if you any of you think that there is a component that's missing outside of community commitment and continuous learning, I'd love to hear about it, because it was something that we also discussed. Like when we looked at the cornerstones of an agile culture, of a transformation, what's there, what's not there, and how do we frame that? I'd love to hear if there's something, preferably a C, that you think is should be in that little group there.
Yeah. And I think let's get it into some open discussion. We've got a couple minutes left. So we'll handle some administrative wrap-up stuff. If you want to learn more about us and scrum.org, right, it's really convenient that the company name is also our URL. So scrum.org is where to go. You'll find us on Twitter and LinkedIn, Facebook. Tons of forums, lots of great resources and opportunities to get engaged with the community that we're committed to, so we can all continuously learn together how to help people and teams solve complex problems. So please come join us there. Here are our email addresses, right? patricia.kong@scrum.org and leslie.morse@scrum.org. I'm not as active on Twitter as I should be, so LinkedIn's probably the best place to catch me. I know Trisha's Twitter game is way better than mine. But when
that must mean your Twitter game is really bad, because mine is really bad.
But the Mentimeter is now open to take questions. So I'm just going to start sharing so you can see us more. And then Trish, I will let you know what questions are coming in from the forum. But yeah, menti.com. Code 671027. So if you're still in there in your browser, the questions can come in there, or feel free to use the chat, or just come off mute.
Unmute. Yeah. I do want to thank the organizers, because I know this was a lot of work, and Leslie and I really appreciate being a part of this. Leslie is very active, obviously, in the Women in Agile community, and I'm a fan. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then Rebecca, we will send you a copy of the slides that have the results from all of the polling embedded in it. So if you've got a way to make those available to all of the attendees, or if y'all just want to email us and get a copy of those, or ping us on LinkedIn or Twitter, we can get those out.
We'll see if we can figure out a way to embed those somewhere. That's awesome. Cool. Thank you. Great presentation.
think it's slowing down.
Yes. Well, then shall we call this good?
We should call lunch. I think that's what we
Yes,
call.
I was going to say on the East Coast, on the East Coast of the United States, it is definitely lunchtime. In fact, I heard my lunch arrive in the room next door to me a couple minutes ago. So I'm very excited about
Oh, is that how it works where you are? It just arrives.
Yeah, at least today, that is how it works for me.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you, Trish. It was a delight to get to do this with you.
It was fun.
Thank you
Yes.
both. And thanks everyone who attended.
Yeah,
All
thanks so
right.
much.
Bye.
Beautiful. All right. See you soon. Bye.